All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I see we got about 50 people or so here, so I'm sure more will be joining as we go along. So welcome to episode 3 of our town hall. I'm excited for this one. This series has been great. We've gotten a lot of good feedback, and we have a heck of a lot more topics planned. So thank you again for joining today. Episode 3 today is efficient trip planning with our VP of Operations, Mr. Rob, who I got on here. My name is Michael Ensminger. I will be your host. Rob, will you go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So my name's Rob Steinke, and like Michael said, I'm the VP of Operations here at Western Flyer. I oversee all of our fleet management efforts. I've been with Western Flyer for about 2.5 years now. I came in as a director of operations, and it became the VP of operations to oversee the whole fleet. I've been in the industry for about 13 years. I've been in many different roles, facets of the industry, anywhere from brokerage, fleet management, customer service, worked out in the shops, all the things. On the leasing side of the business, leasing trucks to independent contractors. So I've kind of found my niche in really coaching contractors on best business practices and how to run a successful business.
Awesome. Rob, thank you so much. You got me beat by a few years. I've only been in the industry about 8. Well, great. Well, let's kick things off. So, related to trip planning, Rob, why is it so important? From a driver's perspective, from a contractor's perspective, from the company's perspective, what's so important about trip planning?
From an operational perspective, which applies to all of the above that you mentioned, I mean, it's probably one of the most important things a driver can do, and it's pretty much what a planner is doing inside the office when they're looking at matching trucks to loads or drivers contractors to loads and vice versa. We're looking at their hours of service, when they're going to be ready for a load, where they're going to pick up, how far down the road it is. We want to make sure they can pick the load up on time, deliver the load on time. We're looking at when they're going to, how many hours they have left for today on their 70 for the week. And that's really the basic essentials of trip planning and why it's so important. From a contractor and driver perspective, if I were in their shoes, like that's how I'm going to set myself up for success. I now have a plan in front of me. I know where I'm going. I know when it's got to pick up and when it's got to be there. Now I need to know, do I have enough fuel? Do I have enough hours to get there? Where am I going to stop? Where am I going to take a break? Where am I going to get my fuel? And how am I going to run this out to make sure I'm delivering this thing on time and being ready for another load, as quickly as I possibly can to help me drive my production. If I can get to the delivery and get rid of all of the obstacles in the way, the traffic, the weather, the breakdowns, and I'm sitting in the vicinity of my delivery area, I can be sitting there ready, and I know I'm not going to run into any more issues. The chances of something happening causing me to be late is going to pretty much be out the door. And then from the other side of it, if you're a contractor, there's a lot of fueling that comes into it. You're setting yourself up for success there. Where's the cheapest fuel? Where do I pick this up? How many gallons do I need to put on? There's just so many facets of trip planning. But to your point, Michael, today we're going to kind of talk about it just as a general operational and driver contractor standpoint, and to help drive service and production for not only the drivers and contractors, but obviously the Western Flyer as well.
Rob, well said. I mean, let me ask you this. What is the likelihood of a load succeeding? And what I mean by succeeding is safely picking up and delivering on time. What is the likelihood of a load succeeding if we don't have a strong trip plan?
Feel like it's a good question. I feel like you're kind of you're throwing it in the air. You're not, you don't know where you're going to stop. Anything can happen. If you don't have a plan, you don't know where you're going to stop. You don't know how many miles you can make it down the road. I feel like your chances of success are pretty slim. Those contractors and drivers in the industry that are very good at trip planning, and they set their day up or their whole load up prior to heading out, they can then plan for, or at least they've got this plan laid out. They can execute as needed as they run into any issues. If they run into traffic, now they know, okay, this is only setting me back an hour, or they can do as they need to adjust.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, John Story has said this, numerous times in the stand-up meetings. Rob, you're familiar with it, that, there's no luck in trucking, or at least we're not relying on luck in trucking, right? There's strategy. Gilbert has talked about that a lot as well, and we're not relying on luck to make these trips happen, right? We need to have a strong plan. That is a driver and a contractor's strategy. And that's what we want to rely on to make on time pickup and on time delivery. And of course, number one, safely, right? Well, good. Well, let's talk about some components, right? So, Rob, we kind of outlined 5 key components of trip planning: route selection, time management, fuel efficiency, traffic considerations, and of course, something we can't control at all, weather conditions. So let's start with route selection.
These are, like I said earlier, Michael, so trip planning itself it's a simple process. It's complex because there's so many different facets to it. From a company standpoint, we're going to look at it a little differently than a contractor, or a company driver is going to look at it a little bit different. A company driver doesn't have to worry about fuel. They don't have that piece of it. They're going to be more focused on, okay, where am I going to stop and eat for the day? Where am I going to take my break? They have to put fuel in the truck, but they don't have to worry about the purchase price or anything like that. So when it comes to route selection, one of the biggest challenges in the operations side of things is knowing, obviously, which direction to go, right? So you want to take the best truck route that's along the way. There's a lot of tools out there for drivers and contractors to use, different trucker GPSs and options that way. So it's going to be find the best route that's going to go get you from point A to point B in the fastest, shortest, safest way, and plan that way. Set yourself up for your stops as needed.
Right. Yeah. And, bridge laws, right? I mean, when I'm just in my car, I don't have to worry about that, right? I can just place where I'm going, my destination into, my GPS. And, if I miss an exit, not that big of a deal, right? I get to turn around, or I can just get off, get back on easily. But, with professional drivers, the route selection is just such a critical piece, not only, to be timely, but also to be safe.
Agreed.
Well, good. Well, let's talk time management a little bit.
Time management goes right back to what I started off with is, it sets you up knowing how many hours it's going to take to do the load. You and I talked about this a little bit earlier where, what does a company dispatch for trucks when they're looking at a load and a driver or contractor? How are they successfully planning that driver or contractor to pick it up and deliver it on time? What miles per hour are they using? And most carriers use about a 50 mile an hour dispatch. Purpose for that is we know that these guys out there and gals are driving faster than that. They're doing, 65 to 70 when allowed by the speed limit. But they're still going to run into traffic. They're still going to run into weather. They're still going to start and stop for the day to get fuel. So most carriers use a 50 mile an hour dispatch to accommodate for those happenings out on the road for them. And really, when you're setting up your plan for your trip, you're looking at, like I said earlier, you're looking at how am I going to make it on time? And the most important part is managing your hours. Okay, I have 4 hours left on my clock today. I'm going to get 225 miles down the road. Here's where I'm going to stop. I'm going to take my 10-hour break. I'm going to get up and roll because I've got 400 miles to go and I've got to be there by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I've got to be up and rolling by 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning after my 10-hour break, and I'm going to make it on time.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it's no secret that the trucking industry attracts a lot of military veterans, right? And we love our military. At WFX, we support them and support our veterans and thank them for everything that they do. And I think there's several reasons why veterans are attracted to the trucking industry, but in particular, I think something that makes them very successful in this industry as a driver or a contractor is how regimented and diligent they are, right? And when you're talking about trip planning, that's exactly it. I mean, and with regards to time management, you're trying to maximize your time related to, your clock, right? Your hours of service. But also, related to all the other things you have to get done, right? I mean, we're not robots, right? We're all human. We got to take breaks. We got to eat. We got to do our laundry. We got to shower. We got to write all of those things. But if you can really look at your trip and not only plan out your route, but plan out your time and make sure that you're taking everything into consideration, Rob, I think it's a great key component of a strong trip plan. Um, so you talked about fuel efficiency a little bit you mentioned with company drivers, they might not be specifically worried too much about the actual cost of it, but of course they need to consider, just like contractors do, how much they're fueling, right? I mean, for myself and my car, I just top her off, right? Anytime it's getting low, anytime I'm fueling up, I top her off. Obviously it's a little more complicated for our drivers and contractors. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about fuel efficiency and fueling as it relates to trip planning.
So this is a pretty broad subject too when you're talking to a large audience like we are today. Because if I'm a contractor, I'm going to look at this a little bit differently because I want to know where the fuel prices are. Or where the cheapest prices are. I want to put the least expensive fuel on my truck as possible and the least most expensive fuel on my truck. So that's really important for them to look and pay attention to what the prices are, where they're going, what the market they're going into, and that's gonna play a big role in this trip planning piece of it. From a company driver perspective, they're still doing the same things, but they're managing that more. We as a company kind of manage where we go for stops. We pick Loves. That's our fuel network, right? So they're going to stop at the Loves along the way. They're going to make sure that they're calculating it correctly. Hey, my truck averages about 7.5 miles a gallon. I'm in an aerodynamic truck, so I can make it this far. I'm going to need to stop for fuel here, and then maybe I do my 30-minute break, maybe I do my 10-hour break, and I keep going to make on time and set up my hours from there.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I've heard you talk about fuel purchasing habits specifically in orientation, and in preparation for this episode, you and I talked about how, man, we could take just fueling and talk about that for an entire episode, and heck, maybe we do that in the future, right? But um, one example that you use is California, right? California is a beautiful state, not a beautiful one to truck in necessarily, right? So, if you're in Arizona, perhaps, and you're making your delivery in California, you typically use the example of, maybe somewhere in Arizona, Kingman, let's say, is maybe your last stop to fuel before you're getting into California. You talk about calculating the fuel you need to fuel up in Arizona or New Mexico or something like that and get into California and back out, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's going to be obviously on all sides of it. From a company perspective, when we're looking at company drivers, we really want to plan for that too, because we as a company, one of our biggest costs or one of our largest expenses is fuel, right? Anybody that's running a truck and paying for fuel and has those expenses, that's number one. So we want to make sure, to your point, we don't want to fuel in California if we can at all help it. We don't want to fuel in some of the more expensive states, Washington, Oregon, right? When we do, it's only as needed to get out to some of the cheaper places. To your point, Arizona's cheaper, yes, but not by much. You know, in today's world, it's about a 60 to 80 cent difference, but it's still 60 to 80 cents a gallon cheaper that you want to try to, if you're going to have to fuel there. You know, so really when you're talking fuel efficiency for trip planning, it starts at the beginning of your trip, not as you're in Arizona. It's, say you're coming from Oklahoma, you want to, if you're going to fill in Arizona, you want to put as few gallons on as there in Arizona as possible too, when you top off, to make sure you can get into California and out again, because you want to avoid that. Maybe when you're talking about New Mexico being some of the cheaper prices out there, maybe you plan it to fuel more gallons there and get back into New Mexico with enough gallons so you're not overspending, because that's money you're never going to get back again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the last piece on fuel efficiency, Rob, that I think it'd be really good to touch on is miles per gallon. I mean, what can drivers and contractors do to manage their MPG and really improve it?
There's a number of things. Obviously, we got a number of factors that affect miles per gallon, but a lot of things that drivers and contractors can do is, watch the heaviness of their foot, watch how hard they're mashing the throttle on the truck, watch the idle. Don't leave the truck running. When you run into a truck stop, you're going to go in or in to get some food, shut the truck off. When you come back out, you got to do a walk around the truck anyways, because you've been away from it. You don't know what people, you got to make sure your cargo's still safe and nothing's been tampered with on the truck. So start the truck, do your walk around, do your quick pre-trip inspection on it again. And by the time you get back into the truck, 10, 15 minutes later, it's cool enough and you minimize your idle. You still idled it, but not for very long. Even the APU takes fuel. So if you can save a little bit of fuel there by shutting that off while you're in there, that's going to help you. Watching your speed going up and down the road, that's probably one of the biggest factors. Speed kills, right? We go back to the 80s and 90s of those commercials. Speed kills, and it kills your fuel economy. And at the end of the day, when we compare and we look at all the drivers and contractors on the fleet and how fast they're going, when they're running 70 miles an hour, they're burning the most fuel. But when they're running 65 to 68, they're getting some of the better fuel economy. And at the end of the day, even the days that they're on the interstate for 9 hours running, they're still only averaging 55 to 58 miles an hour for the day, because of the starts, the stops, and any type of traffic you do run into. So speed management's a big one.
Well said. Well said, Rob. Well, so the first three key components that we talked about are really within a driver or contractor's control, right? The route, time, management, fuel efficiency. The last two here kind of combined, right? Traffic and weather. Those aren't things we can necessarily control, right? But they are certainly things that we can plan for. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Good point. So you can control the rush hour traffic in a lot of the big cities. Everybody knows no one wants to get anywhere near Atlanta at any time of day, really. It's terrible at any time. But really, I mean, you do have some control over the traffic. So you can control when you're going to go into those areas. You can pick lighter traffic times, not always because of appointment times, but like we talk about time management, knowing your route, knowing the areas you're going into, you can prepare for that. Maybe running a little bit later into the night to get to your delivery in Atlanta and finding a place close by. I understand the challenges that these guys deal with and gals deal with out on the road of parking, not enough spaces, truck stops. So kind of managing that piece around that can be sometimes, I guess, challenging, but they can use that to get around some of those heavy traffic areas, pick the time of day that they're going in there, or at least goes back to what I said earlier, get to your delivery your delivery area as quickly as you can, so that when you do run into those issues, you're not gonna they're not gonna be as detrimental as if you said, hey, well, on this load I've got an extra 8 hours, so I'm gonna take a couple of 14-hour breaks instead of a couple of 10-hour breaks. Now if anything happens, you're behind and you don't have control over those situations, but you did earlier on in the game.
Such a good point, right? I mean, get there, get to that area so that, if anything happens along the way or, anything happens while you're there, it's so much easier to adjust if, you have the bulk of your trip, completed, right?
Correct.
Well, good. Well, that's five key components of trip planning, Rob. Thank you for that. Let's move on just briefly to technology and tools. Operations, certainly you mentioned this, is doing their own version of internal trip planning, right? Kind of starting with our planning group and certainly our fleet managers are looking at that too, right? We want to make sure, first of all, that can can a driver or a contractor log this load, right? I mean, first of all, we need to make sure that works, right? So what are some operations tools that the team uses internally?
A lot of the tools we use, so we're looking at, you've got it listed there. PC Miler is the tool that we use. It's highly used amongst carriers in the nation. Obviously, when you're looking at specific routes, not every carrier has the same PC Miler portions that they can look at. Not all of them can look at the maps or anything. So we compare those routes, the miles, to, we use Google Maps, we use other different tools, but those are the two main ones. And one thing that just sparked me a little bit when you said about us looking at the driver's hours of service and all of that. We're also, one component we look at is we also look at the capabilities of the driver and the contractor. That's a big play in trip planning for us in the office, is how strong of a runner are they? Are they one that has to take multiple breaks? Are they a 500 mile a day person? Are they 700 mile a day person? Will they run their clock out, take a 30-minute break, run the rest of it, and then shut down to a 10 and keep going? So there's a lot of other pieces that we're looking at, which that tool, we use the Omnitrax hours of service to see their hours of service, and we verify that with the drivers and contractors to make sure that our plan is what we see on paper is what they see and they're capable of as well.
Yeah, good point. And also home time, right? Home time requests and considerations. I mean, I know, fleet managers are absolutely making sure that we stick to those commitments as well. So yeah, I mean, so much that goes into it, right? What about tools that drivers typically use? Drivers and contractors. I know, certainly you talked about, our fuel network being Loves. Obviously, the Loves app is a big help, not only for fueling and fueling locations, but also for parking and rest stops and things like that. What are some other ones?
There's several apps that drivers and contractors are using a lot. One of the most popular ones that I hear is the Trucker Path, right? Because that has a GPS component to it. It's going to tell you the fuel stops, tells you pricing, tells you you can trip plan right on that app. Actually, I have it on my phone and I use it when I'm working with contractors so that we're looking at the same thing. You've got some listed there, Gas Buddy, the Loves app. That's one popular by the company drivers because that's where we all have to fuel if you're using our fuel network, right? Company drivers are limited to that. Contractors, if they're using our fuel card, they're limited to the Loves as well, right? So that's an app for them to use. Rand McNally, there's hundreds of different GPS options out there for, you've got the PC Myler GPS, the Rand McNally, and then there's still some old school guys and gals out there that use the, as you put on there, the good old Atlas. You know, it's always good to reference that, make sure that you're on an approved trucking road or route.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, Rob. GPS and technology as a whole are fantastic, right? They're great tools, but they don't, something you and I talked about in preparation for this episode was solely relying, especially for a trucker, relying on a GPS is not the safe way to go about it, right? I mean, you need to make sure that although you may have a trucker specific GPS, that you need to make sure that your trip, your route is planned accurately and according to what you're driving. Right. Again, I briefly talked about this before. In my car, I can just hop in, put in my destination, and I can go, right? And if it takes me, on a wrong turn, or if I miss an exit or something like that, it's pretty easy for me to adjust, right? But we do not want our professional drivers and contractors solely relying on GPS, right?
Correct. I mean, it's like you said earlier, checking on weather conditions. You're looking at different road closures. Yes, GPSs, they account for that, but they account for that a lot of times in the right now. They're in real time. So that traffic jam that's in Georgia and you're sitting in Oklahoma isn't going to affect you right now, and it's that construction maybe, but always looking ahead, doing your research ahead of time. Are there any major road closures? Looking at the DOT websites for the states you're going into just to double check and make sure, staying in the know, like the landslide up in Wyoming, you know, not that long ago that created some road closures. That's going to be a semi-long-term deal. It's like knowing that and using those tools as well is important for them.
Good call. Well, let's talk about this briefly. Any new technology, new tools, or anything like that we can share with the folks?
As a large carrier or any carrier for that matter, we're always looking into different options, different technology that can help us be more efficient, help us be more profitable. Name the game, right? We're all in this to make money. So best way to do that is minimize your expenses, and by doing that, you become more efficient. So we're always looking in different tools, testing different things out to see how it can help our drivers, how it can help our contractors, and then how it can help us be better, more efficient, and more communicative.
Ooh, nice word there.
It was a big word. That was hard.
Nice. Well, great. Well, kind of our last section before we get into the Q&A. Rob, talk to me about things that, in your experience and your time in the industry, common challenges, right? I mean, things that you just see kind of repeated over and over and over again that, can cause some issues with regards to trip planning.
So there's two different perspectives on that. There's the driver and contractor perspective, right? They're out there on these roads and their challenges are, number one, places to park. So they're trying to plan for that. Where do I park? Where do I get my sleep? Where's a safe place? Where do I have some amenities? That kind of thing. There's the weather, the construction that's ever ongoing, especially in the South. It seems like it's 365 days a year, right? So those are some of the challenges. And then there's the challenges that some guys out and gals out there don't know how to trip plan. They don't know where to start. They don't know what to do. They look at it and they want to, for lack of a better term, they may not do this intentionally, but fly by the seat of their pants. Ham it or run and whatever, I don't know where I'm going to stop. I'm not even going to look until I get down the road because so many different things could happen. I don't want to plan and then have to replan. So that's probably a challenge. And that's one of our challenges in the office, because like we said, when we're looking at, we've got a big focus in the market that we're in and have been for the last, 20 months, 22 months, it being customer centric, that we have to service this freight. There's less freight out there than there was 3 years ago. So We've got to make sure we're taking care of our customers, picking it up and delivering on time. For us is making sure that our drivers and contractors have those plans, know where they're at, setting themselves up for success. And, the communication piece between our fleet managers and them so that they're on the same page. When I go back to my old school days of fleet managing, I had that dialogue with my fleet or with all of my drivers and contractors. Hey, where do you start? What's your plan? Where do you plan on stopping? How do you plan on getting there? How do you plan on running your clock? Here's where I can see, as long as we're on that same page, it's not intrusive. It's not meant to be, displaying no trust. It's just to make sure that we're on the same page so we know how you're going to run it, and if we can anticipate any additional issues or anything like that, because we've got to make sure we're communicating with our customers as well. And when they're asking us several times a day, where's my load? When's it going to be there? Are you still on track? We want to make sure we're as informed as we can be, and our drivers and contractors are as informed as they can be.
Yeah, Rob, well said. And one of the things you touched on just briefly there was, maybe some folks aren't as confident in their trip planning as they'd like to admit, or they'd like to be. And there's several different ways that drivers and contractors can get in touch with you, but an easy way, emailing townhall@drivewfx.com. If you have any questions around trip planning, you want to get on the books to chat with Rob in a little bit more detail or something like that, please go ahead and email us there. I manage that email as well as my team, and we'll make sure that we get those questions over to Rob. And if they, if we need a little bit more dialogue, he'll definitely not hesitate to give you a call. So Rob, thank you for that. So let's dive into a couple Q&As real quick. We're doing pretty good on time. So first question, this one comes from a WFX employee. What's the average MPG, miles per gallon, a driver should use when planning their trip? You talked about miles per hour a little bit being kind of that average, 50, 52, maybe even 55 miles per hour for planning your trip. But what's a good MPG?
It's going to be dependent on the driver or contractor and what type of equipment they're in. If they're in an aerodynamic, fuel efficient truck, the average is 7.5 miles a gallon. Those trucks are spec'd out there to get that. That's a good, fall back on if you need to. But it's also important to pay attention to the performance of your truck. How is it doing? Where have I been the last week, the last 30 days? If they're not looking at that, that's information that their fleet manager has access to. They can look it up and give them. So, hey, the last 30 days you're at this. Okay, that's a good number to go off of. Some of the lesser fuel efficient trucks, they might be 5.5. So you don't want to use 7.5 if you're getting 5.5 miles a gallon, then you're going to run out of fuel somewhere and you're going to put yourself in a bad spot. So I think it's really important to, take what you're in, the equipment, what it's doing, and then, always plan on a little less. If you're getting, like I said, 8 miles a gallon, plan on 7.5. That way you don't put yourself in a bad spot down the road if you do end up sitting in standstill traffic, or, stop and go for 2-3 hours because of a wreck or construction. You're set. It's going to accommodate for that.
Well said. Question 2, another WFX employee submitted this one. Why don't we do verbal dispatch on all loads?
That's a good question, and it's kind of a loaded one. We will like to take in communication. We like to look when we talk to our drivers and contractors, how do you like to best communicate? Some of these guys and gals just want to be left alone, and they've proven themselves over time with us. They've built the trust with their fleet manager, and they read all the information, they know all the information, and they can be trusted. They're going to pick it up and deliver on time. They want to only be communicated on the Qualcomm unless there's an issue. And so we take that into consideration. Also, but the other side of that, we might have a new driver or contractor to the company, and we might verbally dispatch on every load with them to get to learn the customers and understand the lane and what their requirements are, just to make sure that we have that they can ask any questions at that point in time. We really look at it situationally. If we have a critical customer, some of you drivers and contractors out there, you hear the Tyson team calling and talking to you about, what's your plan, where are you at, here's some requirements, going over all of the details of the load. That critical customer, if we get brand new customers that's new to us and them, we want to make sure we're communicating that, and then making sure all the information's in the load when it gets delivered to them. But just reiterate verbally. Short answer, would we like to verbally dispatch every single load? Yes, that wouldn't be a bad thing. But there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of pieces that go into it. Taking into account night drivers. Somebody doesn't get a pre-plan until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but they're not running until 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're sleeping, or they're running around at 4 o'clock in the morning rather. We don't want to bother them while they're in sleeper berth just to go over their load. We're going to send it to them. They'll get the information, and then we have our night team on. They can call in and get any additional information if they need it, if they have questions or don't understand something.
Yeah, well said. And, the punchline there, I think, is, the first episode of Town Hall with John Story was about communication, right? And that was intentional. Communication is key. We all know that. If you are a driver or contractor and you have a question, get in touch with us, right? I mean, send a message, give us a call. If for some reason your fleet manager's busy, they will get back to you, but do not, just assume you have the correct information, or assume if you're, maybe missing some information or unclear on something, that you're just going to figure it out along the way. I mean, you got to get in touch, and you got to make sure that you fully understand all the aspects of the load. So, yeah,
Michael,
great.
I might add to that too.
Yeah,
When you're
sure.
communicating, one of the best ways to reach us, obviously, it's any type of messaging isn't usually instant, but the best way to communicate with us, make sure it's documented on paper per se, is the Qualcomm. Use the Qualcomm. We're on the phone with emergencies and other issues all day long, going through some of those loads, working with some of the new drivers, contractors, working with some of the issues. So we may not be able to answer that phone right away, but while we're on the phone, we can also be looking at messages that are coming in across the Qualcomm, and sometimes we can get to that faster, depending on the situation throughout the day. But at least it's there, it's documented, you showed that you communicated as well, and we can have multiple people if we're behind jumping and help with that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that kind of leads us into our third and final question. How should and I being a driver, because this was submitted from a WFX driver, how should I communicate with dispatch and operations if I do encounter any issues during my trip?
I think that's very situational. It's look at the time of day, look at what the situation is. If you're at the shipper and you need a pickup number and you've got 15 people in line, that might warrant a phone call. If you're standing in line like, hey, this number isn't right, they're giving me 2 minutes to get the right number, can you help me out? That might warrant a phone call. If you ran into an accident or a delay that you're sitting in a traffic jam, you're probably not going to be able to send in a Qualcomm message, but a phone call there would be nice. Just to kind of give us a heads up and let us know what's going on. So, like I said, it's very situational. The Qualcomm's always the best way to go because that documents it in that situation and allows us to kind of get to them faster and reference any information we need as for any research that we need to do. But if it is an emergency or it's something that needs to be right now, that's where I would pick up the phone and have that conversation. But always make sure that even if you can't get somebody on the phone, make sure you're sending in a Qualcomm message, because at least you're doing your part, and then it falls on us to make sure that we're doing our part.
Well said. Well said. Well, Rob, this has been a great episode, man. I can't thank you enough. I know that you're incredibly busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to hop on this one with me. Trip planning, like we said in the beginning of the episode, is at the core of every load. And really, if we just step back and kind of oversimplify, what we're here to do, we're here to safely pick up and deliver freight on time, right? I mean, that is simply the goal. And without a doubt, everything that you kind of shared and outlined in this episode, it shows how important trip planning is. Again, for anybody on the call, if you have any questions, anything you want to share, specifically about trip planning, please go ahead and email us at townhall@drivewfx.com, and I'll be sure to get those over to Rob, and we'll get those things addressed. Rob, do you have anything for the folks, real quick?
No, thank you for letting me come on and talk about this a little bit. I will say this. I will say that our fleet managers are very good at what they do. When I'm having conversations with the team, with drivers and contractors, we're also going through that same material with our fleet managers. They're very knowledgeable. I would start with them, build that relationship with them, get to understand the loads, get to understand what trip planning is. A lot of them are very good at that, and they're looking at it every day.
Great point. Well said. Well, thank you again, everybody. Real quick, episode 4 will be a safety related topic coming here in a couple weeks. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, thanks again for joining our virtual town hall. We appreciate you. Stay safe. And thanks again. Rob, thank you, sir. See you guys.